During my high school years, I always went to the furthest restroom to stretch my time. Even then, I enjoyed the silence of the corridors and the surprises that could happen. One day, however, everything changed. The alarm pierced the air and I heard the sound of it for the first time. We weren't doing fire drills at the time, so it all seemed strange and frightening. As I heard the alarm, I saw several students next to me in the hallway begin to rush somewhere. A voice from the speakers asked everyone to go into the nearest rooms and lock themselves in there. It wasn't a drill, and I didn't realize what was going on, but I decided to check a few classrooms. Finally, I found a small room, but there was no lock on the door. I walked back down the hallway, my heart pounding frantically in my chest. Turning the corner, I saw a child. He stood there looking lost and confused. I couldn't leave him alone, so I approached him and suggested that we find a free classroom together. He turned around, and that's when I noticed he was wearing tactical gear. He had handcuffs, knee and elbow guards, body armor, and a bright red bandana. In his hands was a large rifle. I was frightened to the point where I felt my legs go under. We stared at each other for a long time, guns pointed at me, and my future flashed before my eyes. He, the boy I still remembered from high school, stared at me through his glasses and froze in place. With every passing second, it seemed like the kid was about to burst into tears. He continued to stare at me for an interminable amount of time, then lowered his weapon and ran away. I didn't waste a second and ran to the nearest classroom I could find. When the teacher finally let me inside, we heard a gunshot ringing out nearby. Everyone froze in loud silence until the police came and evacuated us from the building. The outside was full of police officers. It turned out that the boy with the gun had decided to kill himself. Later, I had to tell the police about our encounter in the hallway, but no one could prove it because he was already dead. However, I'm sure he had a serious trauma, or something was wrong with his psyche. Imagining myself as such a past person through this event was difficult. Sometimes the nightmares come to life in my dreams, but in them, the guy never puts the gun down, and I wake up spilling sweat every time. My therapist advises me to enjoy the present and not get attached to the past. That's easy to say, but hard to do. I believe I manage to get stronger every day. I have been teaching high school biology for more than 10 years. It is an ordinary school located in the suburbs and famous for its friendly staff and good soccer team. I always feel at home here, surrounded by inquisitive students and chaotic school life. However, there is one day that will forever be etched in my memory, a day I will never forget. It was Thursday morning. This day is especially memorable for me because we always have lab work on Thursday, and the students are always busier. Class was scheduled to start at 10 a.m. I was setting up the microscopes on the tables in the lab, and the students were talking about their plans for the upcoming weekend. The weather outside was gray, fall weather, which was typical for this time of year. Just as I began to explain the structure of cells, the alarm suddenly sounded. This alarm bell was not the expected one. I sensed it from the reaction of the students who suddenly froze with bewilderment and fear in their eyes, looking at me waiting for instructions. Although I had previously conducted evacuation drills, this situation was real and frightening. With a calm but determined voice, I ordered the students to follow the evacuation protocol. "Please all immediately stand in the corner of the room and sit quietly," I said, trying to hide my growing anxiety. The students, well prepared for such situations, quickly did as they were told, retreating to the corner of the room. Some of them looked wary and showed clear signs of anxiety. I closed the classroom door and turned out the lights, which created a ghostly illumination in the room. We sat silently in our seats. In the dim light, I tried to read my students' moods. Some tried to look brave, others could barely contain their fear. As a teacher, I felt a tremendous responsibility for their safety. That seemed to grow heavier by the second. Suddenly, we heard a knock on the door. "Help me, please let me come in, he's going to kill me," came the words from the other side. The voice sounded young, desperate, but something about it alarmed me. Thoughts chaos invaded my head. Who is this? A student in danger or a lure? I remembered our training. Under no pretext was the door to be opened. The knocking continued, each blow penetrating the room, causing a wave of fear. I looked at my students, their eyes reflected terror, and I felt a sudden surge of protective strength. I whispered to them that it was important to remain calm and that we were doing the right thing. My heart pounded frantically in my chest, synchronizing with the pounding on the door, but I tried to keep my composure. Finally, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was almost frightening. We stayed in the corner of the room, no one daring to speak. I kept my eyes on the door, every muscle in my body tense, ready for what might happen next. The responsibility I felt for my students was immense. I had to keep them safe no matter what. As we waited in tense silence, my thoughts went back to the days when I first started teaching. I chose this profession because of my love of science and the joy of imparting knowledge, and it didn't even occur to me that my role could expand to that of a protector in such a terrible situation. At that moment, I realized the gravity of what was happening. Being a teacher meant so much more than just teaching. I don't remember exactly how long we spent in this tense situation, but finally the school intercom microphone came on. The principal's voice sounded, announcing the end of the lockdown. The words "all is well" had never sounded so sweet before. Watching my students, I noticed them exhale a sigh of relief. We slowly stood up, some hugging each other and some just silently gathering their thoughts. I opened the door, feeling both relieved and anxious about what might be waiting for us outside. The corridor was wildly quiet, the tense school atmosphere replaced with wariness. Every few steps we encountered police officers, and their presence was both reassuring and unsettling. I led my students to the evacuation point in the gymnasium, as required by intercom. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and each step was heavy with the experience. Once we reached the gymnasium, the evacuation site, the magnitude of the situation stunned me. The gym was full of students and teachers, all trying to understand what had happened. My colleagues' faces reflected the same as mine, relief intertwined with deep anxiety. We were all trying to calm our students while battling our own emotions. Afterwards, we were given a meeting by the school administration and the police. That's when we learned the truth. The shooter turned out to be a man in his early 20s who had knocked on our door. He was not a student at the school, but looked like an outsider. As I looked around at my students, I was grateful that my decision not to open the door had potentially saved our lives, but the thought was burdensome. Later, we learned more about the shooter. He had no connection to the school and apparently chose it at random. He was apprehended by the police as he tried to escape from the back of the school building. It was good to know he was in custody, but it raised a lot of questions. Why our school? What could have motivated this man to commit such a horrible act? This incident changed me as a teacher and as a person. I have always realized that teaching is not only about imparting knowledge, but also about nurturing young minds. Now I realize that it is also about protection, which I did not suspect. It makes me think about the enormous responsibility that teachers have, not only educationally, but in all aspects of our students' well-being. When I was in high school, I was always drawn to go to the bathroom even when it wasn't required. I just couldn't wait to sit in class all day and listen to the teachers. I would ask to go to the bathroom every class to walk around the school and clear my head. That's what happened in math class. I didn't want to listen to the teacher's boring lecture about algebra and other nonsense. The Florida neighborhood where I grew up was not the best environment for teenagers. The place was originally designed as a retirement community, so there were few opportunities for entertainment, especially for young people. Sometimes the only oasis was the skate park. However, our neighborhood also suffered from the lack of its own police force. Instead, sheriffs from the neighboring county were made up. Since I was also in college and high school, I didn't get to school until 11 a.m. at the earliest. So one day as I was approaching the office, I noticed an unfamiliar man near the door. Not knowing what to do, I noticed a sheriff's deputy who looked out and asked if I was a student. When I answered in the affirmative, she led me inside the building to the post office where two other female students who were working there at the time were already sitting. I tried to ask the assistant what was going on, but she would not answer me. So I turned to two other students who, like me, had only a general idea of what was going on. Together we gathered all the information and were able to figure out what was going on there. Everything became clear when we were ordered to evacuate to the gymnasium. and the deputy instructed us to wait in the waiting room. We watched through the windows as students' names were called out and sent to the library where they were asked questions. We smarted at the whispers and shared speculations about what might have caused such a ruckus, but each time the deputy yelled at us, demanding silence. The bell for recess rang much later than usual, which caught our attention. We were curious and wanted to know what questions were asked of the students who were called to the library. Other students told me about what had happened before I arrived. Finally, the sheriff's deputy got tired of yelling at us and declared that this was no time for fun at all. We all realized that the situation was serious, but the confirmation of this stunned me and silenced me. A few minutes later, the agitated ceramics teacher appeared in front of us. My math class was located very close to the girls' restroom. It seemed like the walls were the only thing separating us. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and we had our last algebra class. The teacher had already finished teaching, and everyone was waiting for the bell to ring, just chatting idly. Suddenly, we heard a girl screaming for help. Knowing this school, I thought it was just a prank or someone trying to get attention, maybe getting hooked on drugs or something like that. The screaming didn't last long, only about 5 seconds, so my math teacher decided to go out into the hallway to see what was going on. All the students went to the door trying to see something. When the bell rang, we walked out of the classroom and saw a trail of blood leading to the nurse's office. Stains and puddles appeared all along the way. As we headed to the next classroom, which was music, I was unusually excited. When I got to class just minutes after the bell rang, an announcement came over the intercom that the school was going into lockdown. We all went to the stage where we continued our musical exercises, closed the curtains, and turned out the lights. Discussion of what had happened erupted instantly, and since news travels fast, we already knew the gist of what had happened. There was a girl in the restroom who had a knife and a hockey mask, and she had severely injured another girl in the restroom. When the bell rang, the victim with the knife was taken to the nurse's office. The knife-wielding killer managed to escape from the school. We were still in isolation as the police and the school administration did not yet have full information about what had happened. We all sat there for about an hour and a half, which seemed like the longest of my life. Everyone was a little or quite scared, and I could literally feel something squeezing my heart. My heart was pounding faster than usual. When we were finally allowed to leave, we learned that the knife attacker had been found, and the injured girl had been taken to the hospital where she received expert care and was safe. It was 7th grade, 5th period. One more lesson and we would have freedom for the rest of the day. During this period, I had a teacher who we ourselves called Mr. P. He was one of those cold and impenetrable teachers who would just give us information and assignments and then let us go. We all worked until the speakerphone beeped and our dean's voice came out, sounding almost frantic. "Please proceed to level 3 lockdown. Thank you." The announcement sounded. Our schools had 3 levels of lockdown. In level 1, we simply closed and locked the doors. In level 2, we barricaded and hid. And on level 3, we did everything we could to defend ourselves, even arming ourselves. I, who was at a desk near the door, immediately picked up on this signal and closed the door. The other students and I moved some desks and chairs forward, and Mr. P told us to get our textbooks. I won't lie, it was scary to see such a serious expression on the usually calm teacher's face. All around me, the girls were crying, and only me and one of the softball players kept calm. The boys were acting like real idiots. We were silent for a while, and Mr. P pulled a window hammer out of the closet and sat by the door. I'm sure he was writing a message to his wife, who worked in a neighboring classroom. At this time, the textbooks accidentally fell down, making a loud cracking noise that made the girl next to me shriek. It was so loud that I thought someone had crashed into the sliding wall, separating our room from the hallway. Eventually, we were let out after about 50 minutes. I started rereading the textbook and lost track of time. Talked to a few people and we were all scared. Someone told me that there had been a shooting at an elementary school that was 7 minutes away from us. Those words made my heart sink. My little sister was there. Eventually, when we got home, I talked to my mom, who shared with me the details of what had happened. Turns out it was just a misunderstanding. My mom works in our neighborhood. The police came into our building and informed the person on duty of the incident. Not far from our elementary school in a neighboring town, A man barricaded himself in his trailer with a large number of weapons. He was apprehended and everyone was safe. A friend of my mom's told us what was happening at the elementary school. The third graders were at recess when the lockdown was announced. One can only imagine how scared those poor kids were. Anyway, it may sound silly, but it was really very scary.